cardiomyopathy, another is granulomatous myocardial disease. These four issues will be taken up. First is tachycardiomyopathy by Avik Karak. Dr. Shouro Mukherjee, please.
Okay, so good evening to all of you. So the first speaker, Avik Karak, is going to talk about tachycardiomyopathy. Just to give a very brief introduction to the subject. So the concept was there that the tachycardia produces LV dysfunction way back in 1949 when you had a paper when even atrial fibrillation, that term was not used. They used to call it auricular fibrillation. So auricular fibrillation, is it a cause of reversible left ventricular failure? So that was the topic way back in 1949. So after that, this particular terminology came up. So without wasting much time, I would invite Dr. Avik Karak, who is a new budding cardiologist. In fact, he's a postgraduate. He has done his DM just a couple of years back. So over to Dr. Karak.
Thank you, Shouro sir, for your excellent initial presentation and initial talk. So without wasting time, I shall proceed with my topic. The topic is tachycardiomyopathy, its evaluation and management. Well, it is classically defined as a reversible impairment of ventricular function that is induced by persistent arrhythmia. The more current definition is atrial and or ventricular dysfunction secondary to rapid and or asynchronous or irregular myocardial contraction, partially or completely reversed after treatment of the causative arrhythmia. There are two categories of the condition. One is arrhythmia induced, the other one is arrhythmia mediated. Arrhythmia induced is the one where arrhythmia is the sole reason for ventricular dysfunction, and arrhythmia mediated where the arrhythmia exacerbates the already existing ventricular dysfunction or worsens the heart failure in a patient with a concomitant heart disease. The various arrhythmias that can lead to LV dysfunction, we need to remember that supraventricular tachycardias are more frequently involved than ventricular arrhythmias. Irregular rhythm, dyssynchrony, and persistent tachycardia are the important causative factors. Irregular rhythm like atrial fibrillation or atrial and ventricular ectopy. Dyssynchrony like PVCs, RVBB or LVBB, RV pacing. Tachycardia like supraventricular tachycardia, atrial fibrillation, all these can lead to myocardial dysfunction. If we look into the pathophysiology, it is not fully understood, but the possible mechanisms and molecular, microscopic and macroscopic levels are ATP depletion, ischemia, and stress, leading to abnormality in the myocyte contractility, neurohumoral alterations, molecular abnormalities like reduction in the beta receptor non-sensitivity, all leading at the macroscopic level to structural changes like chamber dilatation, reduction in the wall thickness, and functional changes like reduction in the cardiac output and ejection fraction, increase in the systemic vascular resistance, diastolic dysfunction, mitral regurgitation, so forth and so on. Look into the presumed risk factors. They are type, rate, duration of the tachyarrhythmia, the patient's age, underlying heart disease, drugs, and coexistent medical conditions. So tachycardiomyopathies can occur following any of fibrillation, ectopic atrial tachyarrhythmias. It can occur at any age. It is reported in infants, children, adolescents, and adults. So classic clinical includes signs and symptoms of congestive failure and dilated cardiomyopathy. But remember, we need to remember patients may not necessarily present with an arrhythmia at the time. Now, we look into factors that point to a diagnosis of tachycardiomyopathy. One is the evidence of previously normal ejection fraction, a degree of LV dysfunction that is out of proportion to the other comorbidities, no definite cause of non-ischemic cardiomyopathy found, absence of LVH, relatively normal LV dimensions like LV end systolic dimension below 55, recovery of LV function after control of tachycardia, rapid decline in the LV ejection fraction following recurrence of the tachycardia in a patient with recovered LV function after previous control of tachycardia. Chronic tachycardia, usually more than 10 to 15% of the day, can lead to tachycardiomyopathy. Treatment, once it is suspected, a proactive treatment is necessary. The strategy exactly depends upon the causative arrhythmia, whether it's supraventricular or ventricular. Either a rate control or a rhythm control strategy is employed. potentially curative ablation is often the treatment of choice. If we look into the overview of the pharmacotherapies, the choice of the drugs depends upon the underlying arrhythmia. Commonly used classes are antiarrhythmic drugs, beta blockers, calcium channel blockers. Apart from that, digitalis is very, very important. Digitalis or calcium channel antagonists like verapamil are effective in supraventricular tachycardia. Digitalis with verapamil is also found effective in ectopic atrial tachycardiomyopathy. Class 1 antiarrhythmic drugs, due to the negative inotropic effects, usually are avoided. For junctional ectopic tachycardias, medical management is generally the first line of treatment, beta blockers and amiodarone. For PVC-mediated tachycardiomyopathy, pharmacotherapy is targeted at suppressing or eliminating the PVCs. Antiarrhythmic therapy is usually for patients who fail or reluctant to undergo the catheter ablation. Beta blocker and non-dihydropyridine CCBs, dofetilide, mexiletine, sotalol, or amiodarone. Now coming to persistent atrial fibrillation is one of the most common cause of tachycardiomyopathy in adults, though which has come earlier. Whether the atrial fibrillation is the causative factor for the cardiomyopathy or cardiomyopathy has led to atrial fibrillation is a debatable question. It's not very easily answerable. It's sort of a question where the chicken has come earlier or the egg has come earlier. Anyway, the LV function improves with any number of atrial fibrillation treatments like rate control by pharmacological therapy, pace and ablate procedure, rhythm control with pharmacotherapy, and catheter ablation. Regarding the pace and ablate procedure, studies have shown that there is definite improvement in patients where the atrial fibrillation is uncontrolled, even with maximal tolerated medical management. However, this approach resulting in LV dyssynchrony should be used as a last resort and is usually reserved for elderly patients intolerant to medications. Rate or rhythm control, we all know rate control strategy is enough. Rhythm control strategy using antiarrhythmic drugs has not shown to improve the all-cause mortality or preventing worsening heart failure. Lenient rate control, where the resting heart rate less than 110 beats per minute, vis-a-vis a strict rate control of a resting heart rate less than 80 and a heart rate of less than 110 with moderate exercise. It has been shown that lenient rate control is as effective as a strict rate control and is easier to achieve. Now, if you look into the restoring and maintaining sinus rhythm by catheter ablation, various studies have shown that catheter ablation offers an effective rhythm control strategy and avoids potentially toxic long-term antiarrhythmic therapy. The available data argue for catheter ablation as the best choice for rhythm control in patients with AF-mediated arrhythmia-induced cardiomyopathy. Now, regarding atrial flutter, we all know atrial flutter is more difficult to rate control than atrial fibrillation given the less concealed conduction to the atrial AV node. And due to the inherent difficulty with the rate control, ablation to eliminate the atrial flutter is recommended. For those in whom catheter ablation is not feasible or desired, a cardioversion with antiarrhythmic drug therapy or an aggressive rate control should be used. One study has showed that in patients with atrial flutter, 25% patients had LV dysfunction and 57% of the cases improved after successful ablation. Regarding PVCs and ventricular tachycardias, idiopathic VT and more commonly frequent PVCs can lead to cardiomyopathy, especially PVCs with a QRS duration more than 150 millisecond, epicardial origin PVCs, interpolated PVCs, PVC burden of more than 5,000 to 30,000 PVCs per day and contributing to more than 10 to 24% of the total QRS complexes in a day. Male sex, all these are risk factors for cardiomyopathy, tachycardiomyopathy in these patients. PVCs associated with cardiomyopathy usually arise in the RV or LVOT tract. Therapy should be targeted at either suppressing or eliminating the PVCs, either by antiarrhythmic therapy or by catheter ablation. Beta blocker and non-dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers, though, are low-risk therapies but have limited effectiveness. Dofetilide, mexiletine, sotalol, or amiodarone may be more effective, although they have greater risk of side effects and proarrhythmia. Antiarrhythmic drug use is frequently reserved for patients who fail or are reluctant to undergo catheter ablation. Regarding catheter ablation, it has emerged as one of the definitive therapy for PVC-mediated arrhythmia-induced cardiomyopathy, with success rates ranging from 70 to 90%. Elimination has shown to improve LV ejection fraction, ventricular dimensions, mitral regurgitation, and functional status. In an observational series, ablation was superior to antiarrhythmic therapy in reducing PVCs and improving LVEF. The successful ablation can improve the efficacy of CRT therapy in non-responders also. elimination of high PVC burden, and in fact it has been shown that reduction of the PVC burden to less than 5,000 PVCs per 24 hours has shown significant improvement in the LV ejection fraction over long term. Regarding recurrence, there is evidence to suggest that recurrent tachycardia in patients with previously diagnosed tachycardiomyopathy may result in faster and more severe onset of tachycardiomyopathy than the initial presentation. In one study of 24 patients, 5 had recurrent tachycardia with rapid drop in ejection fraction and symptoms of heart failure occurring within 6 months. And it has been supported by other small studies as well. This suggests that there must be some structural cardiac abnormalities persisting even after apparent recovery in the function. Therefore, maintenance of heart failure treatment regimen, even after normalization of the ejection fraction and continued monitoring of patients for recurrence of arrhythmia, is a prudent strategy. Regarding risk of sudden cardiac death with tachycardiomyopathy, little information is available. Long-term survival of patients with TCMP following arrhythmia resolution is likely. However, concerns are definitely remaining. Sudden cardiac death has been reported in patients with arrhythmia-induced cardiomyopathy following symptom recovery and LVEF normalization. Close surveillance is, as well as continuation of neurohumoral antagonists, is definitely warranted. So if we look into the management summary, in any patient with suspected tachycardiomyopathy, we need to assess the rhythm burden. We need to image for structural heart disease either by echo or MRI. We need to minimize the arrhythmia by rate or rhythm control strategy. Appropriate guideline-directed heart failure therapy should be instituted. Either if those are not possible in AF, pace and ablate procedure can be option. Ablation can be an option. In supraventricular tachycardia, curative ablation, PVC ablation can be an option. If there is resolution of the LV function with rate or rhythm control strategy, close monitoring should be done along with continuation of beta blockers as well as AC inhibitors and routine image surveillance. If there is tachycardiomyopathy recurrence or there is decline in the LV function, we need to correct the arrhythmia as early as possible and optimize the heart failure management. If there is no resolution of the LV function with appropriate control of the tachyarrhythmia, then tachycardiomyopathy is unlikely. Continued therapy of neurohumoral antagonist is advisable for favorable remodeling even after resolution of the LV function. We look into the prognosis in patients without evidence of persistent ultrastructural changes by echocardiography or MRI. Definitely is good prognosis, and it should be followed up by maintaining sinus rhythm or strict rate control. Close surveillance for arrhythmia recurrence is mandated, and continue the beta blockers and AC inhibitors and ARBs. Follow up with imaging. In patients with persistent ultrastructural changes with evidence of fibrotic changes in MRI and persistently increased LV dimensions, a prognosis is definitely guarded, and a close surveillance with continuation of optimal anti-heart failure medications is mandated along with adequate management of the tachycardiomyopathy. So lastly, so my concluding slide with the key messages would be always we need to consider an arrhythmic etiology as a factor contributing to cardiac dysfunction, especially in the absence of overt ventricular structural abnormalities. We need to seriously consider an early rhythm control strategy and the possibility of ablation and atrial fibrillation cases of tachycardiomyopathy. We need to carefully review the ventricular ectopic burden and morphology in cardiomyopathy patients with a view to electrophysiological assessment for ablation. Consider ablation of monomorphic ectopics in cardiac resynchronization non-responders if receiving less than 97% biventricular pacing due to ventricular ectopy. At the end, I would like to conclude with this last statement that in patients with tachycardiomyopathy, even after resolution of the LV function by appropriate rhythm or rate control strategy or ablation or whatever way, we need to continue the heart failure management like beta blockers and AC inhibitors or ARBs to prevent further recurrence and to prevent reduction of the LV dysfunction in future if recurrence of tachycardia happens. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Karak. That was an excellent deliberation. So there is 2 points I want to make. Number one,
Dr. Mukherjee, can we have the discussions at the end?
Okay, after all the speakers are over.
Yeah, that will be better. We'll have the discussion at the end. You continue.
So may I invite the second speaker? We'll be talking about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, Dr. Bashavendra Chaudhary. He's also a young MD, DM postgraduate who has just passed out. So I'd like to invite him. He'll be talking about hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. And let us see what are the valuable inputs he can provide.
Dr. Bashabendra Chaudhary is there? Dr. Chaudhary are you there?
Sir, he is there, but he is on mute.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. Thank you for
Please
giving.
start sharing your screen.
Yeah.
Dr. Chaudhary, you want us to share on your behalf?
No. Can you tell me where is the option of screen sharing?
Yeah, you can see the share button at the bottom of the screen, the green color button,
Yeah.
with an up arrow.
If you are unable to, let them share it on your behalf.
Just take your cursor to the bottom center of the screen. There is a green color arrow. Just click on that. Share screen.
Yeah, but the option of PPT is not coming.
Okay, do one thing, the organizers can start it for you, and whenever you say next, they will be shifting the slide.
Yeah, that's better.
It's all.
So the topic is HCM.